Hi there, welcome to the sew-along for the Perfect Pleat Hoodie. The hoodie is designed for knit fabrics with minimal horizontal ease. You can get away with more. It is designed for a sweatshirting type fabric, so you don't need a huge amount of cross body stretch. You just need enough that the head you can get through the neck hole and the arm. So minimal ease is fine, so 30% would be fine. Because it's a knit fabric, this pattern is designed for 6mm, which is 1/4 inch seam allowances. When you're ready, set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabrics, and you're going to need 2 fabrics, so I suggest you cut the lining fabric in a light t-shirting type fabric because we're going to have to sew through or overlock through multiple layers. So if your lining for your hood and your collar is lighter, you'll find it easier. You're going to need a plain sewing machine. Make sure there's a ball needle in that. When we overlock, we're going to overlock on the raw edge of the fabric. We don't need to cut anything off. And if you're using the ball needle, make sure you test stitch before you begin. Lengthen your stitch length from normal, and don't forget to also do a test stitch on your overlocker in case your tensions need changing there too. And we'll get started. So the fabric I'm sewing with today is a very light sweatshirting. It's probably an autumn or spring weight sweatshirting. It's unbrushed, so it's very similar to a French terry, but it doesn't have the stretch of that. So I'm going to start by sewing the cords that are going to go through our hood. If you don't want to do this, that's fine. You can pre-purchase cording, or you could use shoelaces or something similar like that. I'm going to use a loop turner to turn these through. If you struggle with using a loop turner or you don't have access to a loop turner, I do have a video on my YouTube channel about how to construct these cords just using your overlocker using the thread chain, so you can look at that. So what we're going to do is take your piece and fold it right sides together, and we're going to overlock that together. Now take your loop turner and pass it through. Catch the little hook in one end, and the hardest part is the first bit, which we need to feed through. Once that first little bit turns, the rest comes through nice and easily. Repeat this 3 more times because we need 4 cords in total. Once you've got your 4 draw cords, put them away somewhere safe, and we may as well move on to doing the cuffs. Here is our cuff piece, and at one side of the rectangle you will see a notch. So fold this so that the notch is at the fold position, right sides together, and then overlock this edge here. Then we need to turn this so we have wrong sides together. So pop your hand in, turn it back on itself like this, and just rearrange that so the notches are together and that the seams here are sitting on top of each other. And go ahead and repeat that for the other cuff. So now I'm going to overlock the main pieces of my hood together. Because my lining's a different colour, I will change the thread. So up to you if you want to do that. So place your hood pieces right sides together and you'll see a long straight edge. So that's the face opening edge. And this big curve, when you come down it, has double notches through the back here, which we're going to match when I find them. And we're going to overlock this long curved edge from the top of the head here to what's going to become the centre back here. So place them right sides together and overlock. So here we have our hood sewn together, and this is right side out, and here's the face opening edge. Now down here you're going to have a drill mark position for the draw cords to go through. So you need to make a decision now whether to create a stitched eyelet, a buttonhole, or you could put a metal grommet on, which is a metal ring. So up to you what you want to do. I'm going to stitch a buttonhole in. Depending on your fabric, you might need to put some reinforcing in this area behind here. The buttonhole needs to be parallel to the straight edge, so it needs to run up and down. Just make sure whatever you choose, you can get 2 draw cords through it, so it needs to be reasonably big. So once you have that done, make sure you snip it open. And then repeat on the other side here. Okay, so here is my hood lining. It's a poly spandex. It's really light and probably a bit stretchy. So I'm going to sew the long curved edge with the double notch in it to make the lining. So place these pieces right sides together and overlock. Okay, so I'm going to change my thread colour back to my main colour now. So now we're going to sew the hood together. So take the main and make sure it's right side out, and then match the lining piece to it. The seam we're going to sew is the long straight edge. So we want right sides together. So overlock those together up this long straight edge, making sure the seams match here. So one thing you do need to be careful of if you're sewing with 2 different fabrics is there might be different stretch, so make sure that the beginning and end points match. And also when you reach this intersect point here, just make sure the seams face in different directions, and that way the seam will butt together and there's less bulk to have to sew through. Right, so now we're going to move over to our plain sewer. What we're going to do is create the setback and the channel by folding these pieces wrong sides together, and we're going to be stitching along the edge here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be folding this at the notch, which is at 2.5 centimeters, which is an inch, and we're going to be stitching through the line here. So to make this easier on yourself, I suggest you go to the iron, and you'll see the notch position there. So just press in that seam before we stitch it at 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. Alright, so okay, so once you've pressed this, you'll find it much easier to stitch. It's up to you whether you want to stitch it from the front or the back, the lining side. I suggest you stitch it from the lining side because that's the side that's going to be seen the most often, but entirely up to you. And also just choose your thread colour carefully. So what we're doing is stitching in the ditch. Effectively what we're doing is stitching right in the seam here that we've created. So take your time and make sure you've checked your stitch on spare fabric, a double layer, before you begin. Make sure you have a ball needle here, that you've chosen, if you're using a domestic machine, that you've chosen the right stitch for your machine. I have done a very quick video on domestic sewing machine stitches. The lightning bolt stitch in a nutshell is probably the one you should be using on a domestic machine. And as well as that, make sure your stitch length is longer than normal. So I've changed mine up effectively on a domestic machine. It would be called 3.5. So just when you're ready, stitch from this end all the way through to the other. So it's entirely up to you. I'm going to thread my draw cords through this now. You can certainly leave it till later. I just find it a little bit easier to get it through at this stage. So here is my trusty loop turner, which I have pre-bent. It took me a bit of effort to bend this. I keep one especially bent for this purpose. You can of course put a safety pin through here or a hair clip. There's many ways of doing it. Usually these loop turners come in packs of 2, so I keep a straight one and then I've bent one for a curve. So I'm just going to loop 2 of these at the same time. Okay, so just readjust that until your cords are sitting equal distance out. Okay, so if you're concerned about your draw cords being pulled all the way through, what you can do now is stitch in the ditch through here just to hold those draw cords into position. I'm not going to worry about it because my cords are pretty much decorative, but if you're a person that does tend to use cords, stitch through this here now. What I'm going to do now, you don't have to do, but because my lining is quite curly, I'm going to tack stitch my lining edge to the edge of my main fabric. So I'm just going to stitch this. It's literally 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So now I'm going to work on what you'll probably find the most challenging part of this garment, but if you work through it slowly you'll be fine, and that's the pleats at the hemline. So we've got pleats at either side of the centre front of both the front and the back piece hems. We're going to start constructing the pleats now. So I've put pin heads at the drill hole position, and you'll notice directly opposite each pin head there's a notch in the hemline. So these are going to be our guides when we're sewing. So I'm going to start on the left hand side of the front. What I'm going to do is start here. So this is the notch closest to the center. So we're going to fold the fabric so that those two notches sit on top of each other. And straighten your fabric up along the grain line. So you'll see two drill holes up here. We're going to stitch from the notch here to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch past the drill hole. But we need to make sure the drill holes are on top of each other. So what we need to do is, the easiest way is to pop a pin through the top drill hole and make sure it comes out exactly on the drill hole underneath, like so. And just double check it. So if you've done this properly, we're going to be stitching 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch, away from the fold. So just making sure the bottom is all parallel, because we want our pleats to be parallel to each other. Do a back tack to start. Double check your work. Now I'm going to take the pin out. So I'm going to stitch up, and what I need to do is stitch, it's not through the drill hole, it's just to the very left of it. So it wouldn't even be 1/16 of an inch. We just want to make sure we go to the side of the drill hole, and then we want to go 1 centimetre past it. So that's 3/8 of an inch. And back tack and cut off. So now we need to create the next pleat, and we do exactly the same thing. There's a 1 centimetre gap, which is 3/8 of an inch, to the next one. So repeat the process. Pick that notch up and put it on the next one. Fold your fabric. This drill hole here needs to sit exactly on the drill hole underneath. Like so. Make sure that that bottom raw edge is nice and flat, and make sure you've got a perpendicular, which is a right angle line up. Then come to that notch, which is at 1.5 centimetres, 9/16 of an inch from the fold, and stitch. To 1 centimetre past, 3/8 of an inch past. Now, depending on which pleats you're sewing, just make sure, we can tidy up any height differences later, just make sure that you have these parallel. It won't matter too much, because when we're finished they're going to sit over like that. Okay. And the next one, place this notch on top of this notch. Make sure the drill holes are on top of each other. So when your plates are finished, that's what they'll look like. So tidy up any stray threads, do a bit of quality control work. And the last thing we need to do, although it's not essential, is we want to make sure when we do go to sew our hem that we sew our pleats in the correct direction. So what I'm going to do now is making sure the pleats are folding and face towards the side seam. I'm just going to run a row of tacking stitches to hold them facing the correct way. So now we need to repeat this on the other side of the front and then both sides of the back. Okay, so when you've finished all 4 sets of pleats, we can move on to the pockets. So for the pockets, I'm working with the back piece first. If you come to the side seam, so place your back right side up, and this is the top and this is the bottom, you'll see 2 notches. Take a pocket piece and place it so that it matches the notches. So we want the pocket curve to go down because our hand's going to be going in like this. Well, it would be if it was the front, but anyway. So right sides together, match those notch positions there. Now the seam allowance for this is 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and that's important because we're going to need that. So come to the top notch position here and place that on your 1 centimetre line, and we want to stitch directly opposite the notch. So we're going to back tack here and stitch down and stop directly opposite the notch here and back tack off. Then you want to take, I'm using thread snips, but a pair of scissors, and we want to cut through the seam on an angle. Now we want to stop just short of the end of the stitches. You don't want to cut through the stitches, but we need to give ourselves some room for turning. And we'll do the same thing at the bottom, but on the other angle. So we want the bottom one to angle up and the top one to angle down. So now I'm going to turn this around upside down now to do the one on the other side. So just make sure when you do that that your pocket is facing downwards. Because I certainly know when I was first learning to sew all those years ago, pocket angles I used to get really confused about. So this is the bottom now and this is the top. So do exactly the same thing. Now some people like to open this up and edge stitch on the side of the pocket. You can certainly do that if you want to. What we're looking for really is just to make sure if you turned the pocket through that we would be able to do that nice and smoothly like that. So that's what we're actually looking for, but don't do it at this stage. Okay, so once you've done the pockets on the back, do the same thing for the pockets on the front. So now we're going to sew the pockets together. So take your back right side up and your front right side down, with the top at the top and the bottom at the bottom, and match the pocket piece. Now it's up to you whether you want to stitch and overlock. I'm just going to overlock. What we need to do is overlock around the curve of the pocket to overlock the pocket pieces together. So do that on the other side as well. Okay, so now rearrange your work if you haven't already so that the right side's together and the back at the back and the front's at the front, and then just come down to the pocket at the side seam area. So what happens is the pocket needs to sit to the front, so the reason we put these little angles in is because we need to make sure the pocket will be at the front before we overlock the side seam. So just make sure everything matches and bring the pocket to the front. And when you're happy with that, just pop a pin in. So you have to get all these layers and push that seam out and make it sit nice and flat like this. So now we're going to overlock that side seam there. Now when you come to this area, you will keep overlocking through just to make sure the bulk of the fabric is at the front. So you are only overlocking those two layers there. We'll start at the hemline here. And then where this angle is off, we're going to put the sleeve in. We're going to have to sew the sleeve in the round if you do the pocket this way. I'm sure you'll find different ways of doing it. Actually, I might show you a different way of doing that so you don't have to sew the sleeve on the round for the other side. So that's what we've got here. Now I mentioned we had a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so what we're going to do is just finish the edge of the pocket on our plain sewer. So that's the edge of the top and the bottom of the pocket. Okay, so I'm readily going to admit this is a bit of a cheaty way of doing it, because in theory we need a 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way up, but the reality is you can just, because it's only 4mm difference, so it's only just over an 1/8 of an inch difference. What I'm going to do is just starting just maybe in 2 inches before we get to the edge of the pocket, I'm just going to start stitching at the very edge of my overlocking. And now I'm going to work my I'm going to work my way out until I'm 1 centimetre from the raw edge. because what we have to do here is tidy up the top of the pocket. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch right up to my previous line of stitching, and I'm going to back tack off, and that will just tidy up the edge nice and perfectly. It is a cheaty way of doing it. You are supposed to do a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so if you wanted to, you could actually overlock at 1 centimetre there and then come off and do it up here, but this is certainly, you're not going to notice the difference. So at the other side of the pocket, I'm going to start directly on my other stitching, back tack, and then just graduate that off to my overlocking, like that. So when we turn this through, we have a beautifully perfect top and bottom of our pocket, which we'll top stitch in a minute. So for this side, I'll leave that overlocking until after we've put the sleeve in, so that we can sew the side seam, we can overlock the side seam all in one, and you don't have to sew the sleeve in the round there. But certainly what I suggest you do at this point is make sure you bring all those pocket layers to the front, just to remind yourself, make sure they're all sitting nice and flat, and it's a good idea to just hold them in position. So now I'm going to top stitch this pocket into position through all the layers on the front. So this is the bottom of my garment and this is the top of my garment here. So what you want to do is just making sure, I'll just tidy up that stray thread. You might find this easier to be done from the back, but just place the pocket so it sits beautifully. Remember, this is the bottom and this is the top. And you'll be able to feel the edge of your overlocking through. What we want to do is stitch 1 centimetre, so this is top, this is bottom, although it doesn't matter which direction you sew it, as long as you sew it to the front. We want to sew at 1 centimetre from that edge. So as I said, if you're sewing it from the back, you'll find it easier because you could just stitch it at the 1 centimetre line. I want to sew it from the front just to keep an eye on what I'm doing. I'm going to feel for the edge and just work my way through it like that. Now, I'm saying 1 centimetre, you could certainly sew it with the edge of the foot on the edge of that pocket bulk, whatever you prefer. So we want to start directly on the side seam, and this will help reinforce the pocket opening as well. Don't forget to back tack. Now there's other ways you could do this. You could print out a second pattern piece and then cut for the pocket and then cut 1 centimetre off all sides, place it on top and use it as a template. You could do exactly the same thing but chalk around it and stitch on your chalk lines. It's entirely up to you. But of course the easiest thing would be to sew this from the back of the garment. And then back tack to finish. Alright, so when you've done the pocket on one side, repeat on the other side. So if you're sewing the version that you don't have to do the sleeve in the round, just remember we pinned that, so take the pin out and you can start directly from the side seam area. So you can, and that's probably a tidier way of doing it too, just start from the very raw edge of the fabric, still back tack. It'll be a nice tidy way of starting and finishing that off. So let's sew our shoulders together. Take your garment and place it right sides together. Here's our neckline, and overlock the shoulder area. Now come straight across and do the other shoulder. Okay, so the sleeves are exactly the same, doesn't matter which sleeve you pick up, just take one of them, and I'll start off with the sleeve that we're going to sew in the round. If you're going to sew the sleeve in the round, fold the sleeve right sides together and overlock the long edge. Now this is the cuff version. It's pretty much the same for the elastic banded version. You would sew the right sides together, sew the short ends together, insert the elastic, and then sew it on exactly the same way we're going to do this now. So take your cuff, which is right side out, and place it right side into the sleeve area here. You can do this last, I just find it easier doing it now. We want to match the notches, so we have 3 layers at the outside there, and then we want to match these 3 seams, which is the underarm. So just make sure at least 2 of those are facing in different directions, so you don't have too much bulk going through your overlocker at the same time. Just take your time and just start overlocking from one side of that seam through the 3 layers. Go gently over the seam, and then what we're going to do is just stretch that cuff out to fit to the notch point directly opposite. So it's just a gentle stretch. So if you turn that through and just check that everything's looking fine, excellent. Right. So this is the sleeve that we're sewing in the round. So come to the body of your garment, and this is the one that we overlocked all the way down, and just pop that sleeve in there, right sides together, so the underarm points are going to match to that side seam there. I'm going to pop a pin in to make it easier on myself, and then the notch directly opposite, which is effectively the crown notch, it's not, but it's the shoulder seam notch, matches to the shoulder seam, and go ahead and overlock that into position. So you'll be sewing a big circle for this version. So that's your sleeve there. So if you're sewing the other version, what we're going to do is sew the sleeve in now. So here's my shoulder seam and here's my underarm point here. So place the sleeve right sides together to the garment, and it's going to have a very small where the seams meet. You're going to have a little small point that goes over by about 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch, and that's fine. That's exactly what we're looking for. Just overlock that. And we want the notch to match to the shoulder seam as well. The seam needs to face towards the back. Okay, so now we're going to sew the side seam. So place your garment so it's right sides together, and we'll start at the wrist. Here is our underarm point. And now we're sewing down to that pocket area. Just double check, I know we took the pins out before, just double check that the pocket is at the front. Okay, so now we need to go to the plain sewer again and finish that little edge of the pocket just like we did before. Okay, so just like we did before, we need to graduate from 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Just come to a couple of inches above, stitch down and through, and stop at the top of our previous stitching, and come to the other side and start at the end of our previous stitching and stitch that out to the 6 mil. I mean, if you wanted to, you could sew this pocket at 6 mil. It just really doesn't give you enough playroom if something goes wrong, and it's not very good for reinforcing, so this is a nice quick alternative to it. So now we've just got that other cuff to sew in. I mean, clearly you won't be using both of these methods. You just decide which is better for you, which one you prefer. In some ways, the second method, not sewing in the round, is a bit easier. Gosh, I nearly lost that sleeve for a second. Okay, so just as before, take your cuff, place it into the lower wrist area, match the underarm seam, match the notches, and then gently stretch while you're overlooking that into place. Just be careful of the bulk of the seam, and don't overlock. Don't start it at the seam. Start at one side or other of the seam. So now's a really good time to do the hem. If you have access to a cover seamer, turn and stitch at 1 inch, which is 2.5 centimetres. You can use a twin needle in a domestic machine, or use a decorative stitch. If you need help on stitches, just I have done another video on which stitches to choose for your domestic sewing machine. I'm just going to overlock my raw edge, turn and stitch down. Just make sure, whatever you do, that you do have the pleats facing towards the side seam of the garment. Okay, so I've just sewed 2 rows of stitching just to mimic a cover seamer, and this is the effect we're looking at the hemline. So lastly we have the hoods and the inner collar piece. You can choose to just sew the collar, you can choose to just sew the hood. I'm going to show you how to do them both. First thing we need to do now is prepare the collar. So this is my collar piece. I've placed it right sides together and I've overlocked through the short edge. Now I'm going to tell you this because I know someone will pick up on it. I ran out of fabric, so I've had to cut this on the cross grain. The stretch shouldn't be a problem with it, I've checked that, and you shouldn't really notice it. Not ideal, I know, but I'm only this much short, so too many samples. So when you've overlocked that together, go ahead and, you should probably do it first actually, put your buttonholes in at the drill hole position or stitch your eyelets. So when you stitch these in, you want them to be parallel to the upper edge here. And then snip those buttonholes open. And as I said, when you were sewing the collar piece buttonholes, or if you are going to stitch buttonholes, make sure that, or anything, make sure that it's big enough for your cords to go through. Okay. Now if you need to change thread colour, now's the time to do it. Because the seam we're sewing is at the back of the neck, I'm not going to worry about it too much. So place the lining piece for the collar right sides together. Oh, this is curly, this one. Alright, so, and overlock that seam. Right, so turn these so we have one facing out and one facing in, and match that together. Now make sure you match the correct curve. We want the side with the notches is the shoulder seam, and it'll be very easy to turn these the wrong way like I've just done. So just make sure they are the right way. So when you have these pieces right sides together, we want to overlock them together. So we're overlocking the top edge, we're overlocking the edge that's closest to the buttonhole or the eyelet you just stitched. Make sure that the centre back seam matches. And then you will also have a notch to match, which matches the notch that you will find between your drill hole position buttonholes. So when you've done that, turn it so that it is wrong sides together, and we need to stitch a channel for our drawstrings to go through. So we're going back to our plain sewer. So now we need to top stitch a channel for our draw cord to go through. It's designed for 2.5 centimeters, which is 1 inch from the folded edge. You'll find it easier to press this. The other thing though is if you have a different coloured lining, have a think about what colour bobbin thread you're going to do. So what I've done is I've put the gold colour, which they've called copper, in the top, and I've put black underneath. And it's probably a good idea that you start from the seam at the centre back. But you can adjust that width to suit. So now you need to put your draw cords through. So for this, because of the angle, you'll probably find it easier if you use a safety pin. If you wanted to, you could leave putting the draw cords in this until the end. Okay, so we're almost finished. All that remains now is to sew on the hoods and the collar. What you'll find easier to do now is to take your hood, if you're sewing one, and place the right over the left and match the notch here. That notch is the centre front. And what I suggest you do is just sew a line of tack stitching within the seam allowance. So it's around about 3mm, 1/8 of an inch, just to hold that into place. So that'll just help you a little bit as you sew. So what we've got to do now is, if you're sewing the collar and the hood into the garment, we need to work this out. So when we sewed the collar, we top stitched it. You might also find it easier to tack stitch the lining into place as well. Seems like a lot of work doing these steps, but what it will mean is when we go to assemble it, it makes that overlocking so much easier, especially if you, like me, and you're using a lighter fabric as the lining. Right, so we place the collar into the hood. I don't know how to describe it, wrong sides together. Basically what we want to do is we want to have all the layers that has the opening together, and that's our centre front, like that. So we want everything to face out. So we want the right side of our main to be on the outside. So I guess it's wrong side to right side. And then where we overlapped the hood at that notch needs to sit on top of the notch of the collar there. Now I'm going to tack stitch these layers together as well. It seems like a lot of work, but it will save you a lot of heartache down the track. So as we stitch around, I want to match the notch, because the notch is our shoulder position. And it'll just help distribute the correct seam allowances in the correct place. It doesn't matter what colour thread you tack stitch in, it probably will be cut off when you go to sew this in. However, if you do it in the main garment colour, you have no problems at all with it hiding. So just continue around sewing those notches together. Okay, so with your hood facing right side out, take your garment, and we want it wrong side out, and place this hood into the garment, and we're going to match the centre front. So I'll jump over to the overlocker now. So the last step is to match our points together and sew our hood in. So here is the centre front, and that notch point there matches to the centre front notch at the front of the body of the garment. Making sure you don't catch any of those cords if you've already put the cords through. Find the double notch at the back, and the seam of the back sits directly in the centre like so. Then as we come around part way, we have another notch that matches our shoulder seam, and we have a notch on the other side that matches there. So now we need to overlock this into place. Just if there's any ease, just stretch that out to fit. There shouldn't be, but if there is, be very careful because of the amount of layers we're sewing through. Just go slow and just double check that it's not going to be too much. If you use a nice light fabric for your lining, you'll have no problem, especially with a fabric like this, which is a really light, it's almost French terry, it's a unbrushed sweatshirting. So I'm going to start overlocking this together from around about a shoulder area. And I've got lots of stray threads, and I haven't worried about them because I'm just going to let my overlocker blade cut those off. So I strongly suggest you just check that that's all been overlocked into place properly before you finish. And that's it. We are done. I know this has been a bit of a long video, but thanks for joining me. I love this garment. I'm not sure why. It's a combination of the colour, and it's cool, and I love the pocket stitching, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and join my Facebook pattern discussion group where we have giveaways and you get first to know about new release patterns. Thanks very much. See you again soon.